And go ahead.
Good evening. It's 7 o'clock, so I will call to order the Thursday, October 3rd, 2024 meeting of the Downers Grove Park District. Let's start with the roll call, please, Amy.
Mr. Bender.
Here.
Mr. Dahlstrom.
Here.
Mr. Kattula.
Here.
Mr. Lunt.
Here.
Ms. McDonald. Here.
And we're going to give it a pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not. We're all here.
We're all here. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, okay, move along. Communications. Visitors. Online,
There's no online visitors.
audience, so we'll move ahead to
Discussion items. Thanks. Just want to have a quick discussion on next calendar year board meeting structure. I know there was a little bit of discussion at the last meeting when I wasn't here about adding back some workshops. And again, I wasn't here, but I was told there was a suggestion to do it meetings at 6 with the workshop and then the meeting at 7, or I don't know if that works, or whatever the board wants to do. One of the thoughts that I did have, if we do have the workshops, I can go ahead and schedule some things. One of the things I'd like to do, I had a long conversation last Monday with our attorney, Dirk Price, talking about some of the concerns the board had on some of the material, and suggested that he come at a workshop meeting, kind of talk to the board. And again, they haven't had a lot of issues, so he hasn't been there very often. So it's probably good that we do that. And then I'd also like to schedule AIAI on the public-private partnerships. And then I'll have 2 firms for you to review for feasibility study at Gelwick's. And then we should be hopefully having an architect for you to review with CSPAR for this building. So I can certainly fill those workshops up pretty quickly amongst some other stuff. Just whatever the board preference is to schedule that.
No, I think for one, I believe we should bring back we got a lot coming up this next coming year. I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel, but either we do an hour before, but I think we need to get our workshops back on the calendar for every month. Especially some of the high ticket items that we have. Again, it's up to the commissioners. I can either do 6 o'clock before the hour, or it seems like, Bill, there's a lot of involved for architect plans.
Yeah, I think we can do those in an hour. I've seen other districts do it where they'll have it the hour before the board meeting, and then they just advertise the board meeting starting at 7 or immediately following the workshop. So if the workshop runs a little late, that's fine. We can always shorten up some of the board reports or different things like that in a meeting, so we're not here too late.
Yeah, the only nice thing about separating the workshop and the board meeting is it gives us time to review, analyze, and have conversation, as opposed to a workshop being immediately prior to a board.
Yeah, I would recommend anything that the board discusses at the workshop, so it's not an agenda item at the meeting. Following it would be.
Right,
So
right,
you have
right.
that separation.
Yep.
Right, so yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking, because obviously we've got a lot of travelers here, myself included, and making 2 meetings a month is sometimes more difficult than making one day and setting that day aside. And I guess what I was thinking, and I've seen what you've seen too, Bill, but the meeting will start at 7 or immediately upon the conclusion of the earlier meeting. And it's a meeting to discuss some of those things you discussed, but it's also a meeting to say, here's some things we're thinking about putting on the agenda next month. Do you have some direction before we put this on the agenda next month? Do you want to think about this and get back to me? And then having that full month between the workshop meeting and the meeting gives us time to think about things and say, I'd like to recommend this or not have that. So that some things that, come up during the meetings, we have a little more time to think about. I can certainly do, 2 separate meetings in the month if people prefer to do that. I was just thinking it was, easier to make one meeting a month and two, and except for the budget months, obviously, because these meetings, we know that these ones are gonna
Yeah,
Go.
like tonight it'd be longer.
go longer. And then I was also, I was thinking through this, if we have a workshop scheduled and then we don't have a lot for it, you can always like work in like the board reports instead of, or the staff reports.
Right.
And instead of doing them at the end of the next meeting, because they're not something that we vote on, you can
Right.
fill up time so that make sure we're not starting the next meeting until 7. I would say that fill up time. I enjoy the
Yeah.
reports, but I'm just
I've
saying,
seen
like,
that done too.
to use the time so that it's not, we're just waiting around for 15 minutes or 7 o'clock to start. So, but I could go either way. So.
Does 6 work for you?
I'll tell you, it changes.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, listen, I have no problem being here at 5:30 or 6 ahead of time. It's less engagements, it's less meetings, over the course of a 30-day month. So I'm certainly in favor with that. I do agree, though, we do have a lot of strategic initiatives coming up, in the next 2 years, and I think more engagements is better than less. So I'm impartial to whether we do it twice a month or once a month, in one calendar date a month. I just think we need to engage more.
I'm leaning towards Commissioner Dahlstrom into what he is separated. More I'm thinking about it, I think it's better. We have a lot to digest. We have a lot of big ticket items. We have a lot of expensive items coming up. The time in between gives us a little bit of a chance to digest things more, absorb things more, and I don't know, I'm leaning towards twice a month.
I can do twice a month. I might not always work remotely, and so.
Done twice a month for 7
I-
years. I've always, this has thrown me in that,
Yeah.
twice a month. I'm always like, it's like,
That's been a
it's a
lot.
it's a, so it's fine with me.
Okay.
That's what I signed up for.
I like it as well. I think we got a lot coming up there.
Yep.
So.
So we'll go ahead and rework the schedule with the kind of back to the old. Just off the top of my head, though, January probably would just be one for that month, just because of the way everything falls with conference and that, but otherwise we'll work in two. Okay. All right.
And we do have flexibility, so we'll put some tentative or proposed dates out. Then we'll review and vote on those dates.
Correct. Okay, yeah, so at your next board meeting, we'll have a recommended schedule for you to approve.
Yep.
And then a dean will post it.
And if we need to alter any of those dates, we would at that point in time.
Correct. We can cancel a meeting and then reschedule it as a special.
Yes, especially. Okay, I just wanted to call that out.
Yep.
Moving on to the next item, ADA discussion.
Paul,
Thank you. It's good evening.
Paul got the memo on the blue shirt.
Luckily. So tonight we're going to be reviewing an update to our ADA transition plan. This is something we do every few years. And so is due this year. Just a quick background on ADA. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's approved in July of 1990, became effective in January of 1992. And under the act, public entities are prohibited from discriminating against or excluding a person from programs, services, or activities based on a disability. Now, thankfully, there are a number of guidelines, design guidelines that can help us to know how to meet the requirements for ADA. Those started in 1992. There were the federal accessibility guidelines at that time were active for about 20 years. And then in 2010, there was a new set of guidelines that was released again by the federal government. The US Department of Justice issued the 2010 standards for accessible design, and those became enforceable in 2012, and those are still current today. In addition to that, we have a state of Illinois accessibility code. In 2018, that code was updated. It follows for the most part the federal requirements. But there are a few things that go beyond the federal requirements. An example of that are what are called outdoor developed areas. So in about, I think it was 2013, the US Access Board released new guidelines for what they called outdoor developed areas. The 2010 standard accessible design guidelines already included a lot of outdoor recreation facilities like playgrounds, ball fields. Those were already covered in those standards. But what the outdoor developed area guidelines did is they went beyond that to campgrounds, natural areas, and included things like benches, picnic tables, some of those types of things. The 2018 Illinois Accessibility Code adopted those outdoor developed area guidelines. So those do apply to us here in Illinois. So just here within the Downers Grove Park District, obviously we have CSPAR, which is an incredible resource, providing programming of their own as well as assistance within our own programs, such as inclusion aids as needed within our programs. So that really helps with our programming, but obviously ADA also impacts the physical environment as well, our parks and facilities. So for that reason, in 2010, CSPAR commissioned an audit of all of our parks and facilities. They hired a consultant to do audits for all of the member agencies at the time. And that consultant visited every park and facility and developed an audit which identified all of the barriers to access. So anytime a sidewalk, either there was no sidewalk to an amenity, or there was a sidewalk but the slopes were too steep, each individual barrier was documented in this audit report. And it also included, for each of those items, proposed corrective actions, what could be done to address those items. It's important to note that that audit is not a transition plan until you have, without an accepted timeline and funding. So it's identifying how each barrier will be addressed and when. So our transition plan, it includes all of those barriers, the inventory of all those barriers that were done as part of the audit, but then also has the proposed corrective action items or corrective actions, as well as dates when we intend to address and complete or correct those barriers. Other parts of the transition plan include there is a policy and procedure review that was completed by our ADA consultant. This includes things such as our ADA statement that we use in some of our guides and our grievance procedures and things like that, making sure those are up to date, as well as a program assessment that we completed, our staff completed using a tool that was available to us to review each of our program areas for accessibility. And then lastly, and the primary reason for reviewing this tonight, this year, is it includes a 3-year budget recommendation for completing specific items, correcting specific items. So we've been, the way we've approached the transition plan is to do them in 3-year chunks, essentially, to review and come up with a 3-year plan, essentially, for addressing things within that period of time, and then reviewing the plan again after that period of time and coming up with a new list. So our plan does have, our transition plan has a few priorities within it. For example, to provide access to at least one of each type of recreation facility or park amenity offered within the district. So, for example, Marduk is a good example that we have. Community gardens is an amenity that we offer. Having access to raised beds, accessible community gardens is important because it's our only location of community gardens. We need to provide access. The ADA does allow agencies to reassign a program from an inaccessible location to an accessible location. So for example, baseball fields. You know, if we have a program at one of our baseball fields, and we have someone with a disability that particular field, if that field is not accessible, we are allowed to move that practice or game to one of our other facilities that is accessible. So for that reason, we don't have to have every single baseball field completely accessible. Now, we obviously strive to get all of our facilities as accessible as possible, but we are allowed to relocate if we need to. So for this reason, this is why it's important that at least one of each of our types of amenities, we have at least one that's accessible. Another priority is providing access to essential park amenities at each location. Within our parks, we have drinking fountains, we have portable restrooms, things like that. A couple of these are examples of areas that have been addressed. We've actually been making a lot of progress on this in recent years. We're almost done actually with some of this stuff. I believe all of our drinking fountains are now accessible. The photo on the left is at Constitution, which now our walking path that we have there connects to that drinking fountain. Photo on the right is Marduk, where now we do have a paved surface that leads up to that restroom. So we've been making a lot of good progress on these in recent years, and we're nearly complete with addressing those. Similar item is providing access to all of our playgrounds. Nearly done with this as well. We've been making good progress. This is an example, a photo of a previous condition at O'Brien Park. You can see that in the foreground, there's a ADA parking stall right there in a parking lot. And then there's the playground, but there's no connection for a wheelchair to get from the ADA parking stall to the playground. A few years ago, we added a sidewalk connection from the parking lot to the playground that now makes that accessible. And it's similar to what we're doing at Northside Park this year, putting in a sidewalk leading up to the playground there. And then a couple other priorities, providing accessibility improvements at our major facilities. One that's required some work has been Lincoln Center. The rec center, some of our newer facilities like the rec center and the interpretive center were built after ADA went into effect. So there a lot of things have already been incorporated into the original construction. So there's not a lot of changes or renovations that need to be done to these facilities. But some of our older ones, like for the museum, obviously, and Lincoln Center being older facilities have needed some work to bring those up to code. An example I show here is that photo of several years ago, all of the doors within the Lincoln Center still had doorknobs, and doorknobs are not considered accessible because you're not supposed to have to grasp and twist to get into a doorway. And so you see a lot of doorways now have what's called a paddle handle, which is just comes straight across that someone could push down and pull to open a door. So a few years ago, there was over 30 doors in the Lincoln Center that had doorknobs that all got swapped out, changed to accessible handles. So that was, a good improvement. We have obviously an elevator that we added when we took over that building in the 70s. We added an elevator to get access to all the floors, but then the doors were technically not accessible to get into the room. So that was an important improvement. And then lastly, updating park benches and picnic tables. So this is in a lot of our parks, we do have benches that are located kind of out in the parks. You can see an example here on the right of a couple of benches in one of our parks that's kind of just out in the lawn area, is typical in parks. In order to try to meet the guidelines of the outdoor developed areas guidelines, we need to start bringing some of those benches and picnic tables and make those accessible, meaning there's an accessible path or route leading to them. And there's some other requirements for the benches themselves. Luckily, per those guidelines, I believe it's within each location, we need to try to get 20% of the benches be accessible. So we don't need to make all the benches accessible. We need to try to get 20% of all the benches should be accessible. So we've been chipping away at this over the last few years. Obviously, we have a lot of benches and picnic tables within our park system with 47 park sites. It's a lot of those. So we've been making progress on that. So as I mentioned, the reason for the review is to prepare a new three-year plan, essentially a new three-year budget recommendation. So we put together a list of proposed improvements that we would recommend trying to accomplish within the next three-year period. The first year being 2025, we're proposing some improvements at Second and Cumner Park. There's some brick surfaces there that have settled and are no longer accessible and need to be replaced. Lincoln Center, some restroom alterations that are called out in the plan. You'll see a few accessible portable toilets. So at Ned Bell and Randall Park, we have portable toilets, but they're not, it's basically creating a connection from the sidewalk to those portable toilets so that they become accessible. And then also at Randall, we have a baseball field there that we should be able to make a connection, basically just a sidewalk connection from the sidewalk to the dugout. That would make that field accessible, the dugout to that field accessible. And again, adding a bench along the sidewalk being considered an accessible route, helps us work towards that goal of getting 20% of the benches at Randall Park accessible. Then at Spring, our big ticket item that we've got on here for next year is Spring Park, where there's a screenings pathway that leads through this park that connects a couple of different neighborhoods. And right now it's limestone screenings, which when it's completely dry is considered an accessible surface, but when it's wet and it gets soft, it's not an accessible surface. And so things that we've done in other places would be to pave those pathways like we did at Whitlock Park, paving the pathway to make it an accessible path. And so it would be paving those pathways. The museum, a couple years ago, we reset the brick from the parking lot up to the building because it had started to tilt and tip, and we still need to do the patio on the back of the museum. And then we've got, the plan, it calls out a lot of areas where any place that we have a sidewalk and there's a gap that's more than ½ inch wide, we need to fill that gap. And so we can do that by caulking. And then some restroom alterations. Several of our restrooms, there are just some adjustments that like coat hooks in the stalls that are too high that need to be either lowered or a second one installed lower. A few recommendations like that are in the plan. For 2026, we're proposing a significant amount of the funds actually be used as part of the McCollum Park playground area renovation project. Several of the improvements that we're proposing to do as part of that project are specifically ADA improvements. For example, the horseshoe courts. All of the improvements we're proposing with that are to make those accessible. So we believe we could have ADA funds help be applied to that project. And then just a few other smaller items in 2026. And then in 2027, proposing some improvements at the administration building with some of the sidewalks and parking spaces there. I believe that's the year that we have the parking lot in our capital plan. So kind of putting that together, doing all the work at the same time. Concord Square, some benches again, and picnic tables. Downer Burial Site. Unfortunately, there's currently not an accessible route into the Downer Burial Site. It's off the street. It's up it's up a driveway. And so that'll be a bit of a challenge, but we need to find a way to get access into that site at some point because it's not at the moment. The thought would be because the driveway, actually, we own the driveway, that we could designate a handicap parking space on that driveway, stripe it out essentially as a designated handicap parking space, and then have an accessible pathway into the burial site from that parking space.
So what about once you're inside that fence line? Maybe it's all a grass surface.
Yep, we will need to make a hard surface just inside the fence, to bring you into the cemetery.
But site to plot to plot, you don't need to be accessible and.
I don't think we need to go up to the gravestones necessarily, but I think bring someone into I think we get school groups that come that we'd be able to have all of them to, if there was a child that was part of a group, they want to be able to get into the cemetery with the whole group. And then Memorial Park, just some improvements to make the north ball field more accessible. The dugouts and the seating areas there, and the parking spaces, and then the museum. Again, this, I believe 2027 is the year we were intending to renovate the parking lot there, and we had some possible improvements to the ramps that go into the annex and the parking spaces there.
Is that because I'm sorry for interrupting you, Paul, is that at Memorial Park, is that because it's currently gravel and it's not paved?
Correct.
Okay.
We have the paved path that goes up to the north field.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't get you into the dugout or the bleach where the bleachers are. The gravel again is not considered an accessible surface because if it's wet at all, it's too soft. And then Prince Pond, another challenging one to try to get some benches around the pond. We have quite a few benches around the pond. So trying to get a couple of them to be accessible, meaning they'll have to have an accessible route to them. Trying to find a solution to make those accessible, so.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is the sidewalk surrounding Prince Pound, is that our property or the city's?
So right next to the pond, there's the large stones that you walk on, that's ours.
Okay,
I don't believe I think there's a sidewalk on the other side of the street. But if it's inside of the streets,
yeah,
so the streets that surround Prince Pond,
that's a
you're
village.
inside the curb, it's ours.
Sorry.
But those walkways are just stone slabs,
Okay.
limestones, and so those are technically not,
Pull those out.
they're not accessible. But I believe because we did improvements to get the ramp down to the patio at the shelter at the north end. From there, I think we can bring some walks off on either side a little ways to have a couple of benches there.
The ice
Is-
skaters
is-
will also benefit from
Sure.
that. If and when it's cold enough.
Right, yeah, right.
All the improvements benefits everybody.
It does. Okay, maybe just a question for you, and Sandra, if you know this, please chime in. Can you just remind us about the special recreation levy?
So I think we're gonna have some discussion about that in the budget presentation
Okay, okay,
later, so that might be
Mhm.
the better time to discuss that.
okay, thanks.
But we have used the special recreation levy in the past to fund
Yes.
these
Yeah.
improvements.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 3 years is really a membership contribution, C-SPAR.
Yep.
Our inclusion costs, and then ADA improvements. And I don't, Paul, maybe you remember how many years ago, but a number of years ago, we were making very slow progress on our ADA transition. And then so over 2 years, the board raised the ADA levy to generate the $100,000 in funding every year. So that's why you see the $100,000 over those 3 years. And as Paul mentioned, we've really been making a lot of progress. You can really see that was happening.
Yeah, it was 2016 was the first year of funding, and it was incrementally increased to get to it took 3 years to get to the 100, and then it's been held at the 100. So we're doing a 3-year look ahead, essentially identifying projects that we want to try to address within 3 years. There are obviously other items within the audit and our inventory that would not be corrected within those 3 years. So those items are identified as being addressed in 2028 or beyond. And so obviously our intent would be to come back and review it again in 3 years to create that next set of 3-year plan. And then also I think we may want to consider at some point, maybe within the next few years, having a new audit prepared. That's having someone go out and do the inventory every park and facility like we had done in 2010. That it's been long enough now that we may want to consider. We've done a lot of improvements in the parks that now things have changed since that audit. So we may want to look at doing that in one of the coming years. So tonight we're just looking for feedback and comments on the proposed update. And then we would plan to bring the transition plan back to you at the October 17th meeting for formal approval of the plan. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think it's excellent that this is a priority and how much progress we've made. So,
Presentation, I don't have any. Cover those comments.
Off the top of your head, do you know if the Dorhofer restrooms are ADA accessible?
I believe they are.
Yeah.
I think there were some minor.
Go in.
Yeah, I think there were some minor things that need to be addressed in those, like, you know, small things that can be corrected, but I don't believe I believe they're generally accessible. Yeah.
The toilets, you might need,
The sink fixtures, I don't.
I think the toilet fixtures maybe too, like
Might have been. So
too close to the wall or the stall.
Just a thought.
yeah,
Now that you mentioned that, we'll have to go back. and
Now
make
that-
the
now-
measurements.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at is, let's take a look at Dorhofer
yeah.
and see if improvements are required there.
The challenge with some of the restroom improvements, they can be extensive if you have to, replace and relocate fixtures that can be.
I know. I
But
saw restroom alterations on the bottom line here and I just was starting to go through all the parks and think about the restroom facility.
Those, I will say, have listed on the plan. I think it's like $2,500. They're just minor
Yes.
alterations, and it's several of the restrooms that have these minor things that I think are easy to address. But
Well, good work. I don't have any questions, but once again, outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, great document, Paul. Show.
Doing a quick look, it looks pretty. Looks mostly like gap in the floor, hooks on the door.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
I think generally it's
We
pretty,
don't use that. Yeah, it looks pretty minor.
Yeltsin. Any other questions for Paul or Bill or anything? Talk about it in a couple weeks.
All right.
Next item, budget. Excellent.
I will happily turn this over to Trish for her very first budget presentation. Trish and staff have been working, how many months on this?
Since July 1st.
There you go.
who's counting?
Trish, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know I mentioned a couple weeks ago, but I want to say it again. This is really a culmination of a lot of staff members and their contributions. Every director and their team contributed to the entire budget process. It was a wonderful first experience. So I just wanted to make sure that they get credit rather than just me getting credit because I'm the one sitting here today doing the presentation.
Before you start, I do want to say too, thank you to Bob and John came in and
Oh, yeah.
Trish
that was
do
Bob
a
and
dry
John.
run through on the presentation.
Yes, thank you. You will see this is set up very similar to how the fitness and golf presentation went a couple weeks ago. So the takeaways or themes that we would like you to pick up on throughout this presentation. Just as we go through it, do you have overall concurrence with the budget in general? Guidance on the tax levy that will come with more discussion at the end of the presentation. And what we're looking for in terms of the capital plan is not necessarily the projects. We are just looking to get concurrence that the $3.8 million that's in the budget, which includes golf and non-golf capital, that dollar amount is a solid dollar amount and that the board's comfortable with it. Some themes that you'll notice for 2025 is that demand remains strong in our programming inflation does slow, but just because inflation is slowing, that does not necessarily mean that the costs are also going down. We are recommending growth within both taxes and non-tax revenue streams. You will see an increased growth in expenses for 2025, and this relates to strong wage pressures. We are budgeting for a new full-time maintenance staff that we'll talk about in more detail later. And obviously, the older our assets get, the more we need to maintain and make repairs, and those costs definitely increase with aging assets. And as usual, we do have limited resources for further expansion of operations, debt, and capital. This is just a quick budget timeline. We are currently sitting obviously in the board presentation mode. We would get through tonight. We would look next week to hopefully get approval on the resolutions to post the budget and tax levy for viewing. If required, we would have a tax levy hearing in November with hopeful of final approval of the budget and tax levy at the December 12th meeting. Seeing as we just wrapped up the master plan and that was just adopted, I thought it was important to bring back and circle back what our main priorities of the master plan were, as these are built in behind the scenes and the foundation of the budget. So I'm going to turn this over to Paul just for a quick review of what these priorities are, as he was our leader of the master plan.
Thanks, Trish. Yeah, so Trish just asked if I could do a quick recap of the during the master plan. We had our 5 strategic priorities that were developed as part of that plan. Those being providing modern parks and facilities that offer improved and expanded recreational opportunities for public use and programs, effectively utilizing resources and partnerships to address district and community needs and improve our readiness for future challenges and demands, continuously monitoring, evaluating, and adapting to emerging trends, shifting operational requirements, evolving community needs and customer expectations, continuing plans for development of Gelwick's Park that expand opportunities for both active and passive recreational use by the public, and finally delivering high-quality recreation programs, events, and services that align with the insights from the recent recreation program assessment. So I think that Trish is going to be referring to a few of the strategies from the master plan in her presentation, so she just wanted to bring those back up to the forefront.
Thanks, Paul. Understanding the budget document, you'll see that there's information related to the 2024 projection of how we will end this year. Obviously, the 2025 budget is where we're going to spend the majority of our time, and the 2026 estimate is simply just that. It's not a formal budget. It's more used as a planning tool for staff so we can forecast and look forward second year. For 2024, the year-to-date projection is mainly driven through July 1st. We do make periodic updates on this so we know where we stand. The demand remained very strong. And a couple of efficiencies to point out was that we received that additional $200,000 in that DCEO grant that we weren't expecting. Several projects came under budget, and interest income is strongly in our favor at this time, which has been a fantastic rebound for us. For 2025, for this tentative presentation, built into it for the tax levy, we are seeking the bond and interest increase from the 2022 bond payments. We are seeking about 0.5% for new construction, 3.4% for CPI, and additional $100,000 for special recreation. I will dive deeper into that as we get to that section of the budget. Please remember that golf and fitness are rolling up into this, as this is the total budget document for the district. The average growth is about 3.9% for charges for service, and that is a combination of fee increases, increases in participation along with new program offerings that weren't previously offered before. Operating expenses, you will see, are growing faster than revenues. We continue to have pressure on expenses due to our increased debt payments and the continued funding of the McCollum Park operating expenses, specifically bringing that spray ground online. A fun fact is MR&R has almost tripled since 2020, and it's now over $1.5 million. This is very important as these are the funds that support our aging assets. These are the funds that allow us to do the maintenance and repairs and the replacements of the different facilities and parks as needed. And as I mentioned earlier, there's over $3.8 million in capital projects built into this budget between both golf and non-golf. Please note that as I move through this presentation, you will see information regarding 2024 on your slides. I may not talk about it. That's informational purposes only. I really want to focus on the 2025 budget just to keep the flow moving. I will also ask that as we are talking about the tax section and the levy comes up at that point in time, I do have additional levy slides at the end of the presentation that I will circle back to. So if we need additional conversation regarding the tax levy or changes or proposed changes to it, we could do it at that time at the end of the presentation. Well, looking at the financial summary for 2020 through 2026, you will see the 2025 changes for expenses at 7.7% increase, and the revenue is only increasing 4.6%. What's driving that large increase is mainly personnel. We have $160,000 of new staffing requests. That includes their salary, taxes, and IMRF. This addresses personnel needs that came up within our master plan, specifically related to our parks and facilities and Lyman Woods. We have additional debt that comes, 2020 refunding savings has expired. We also have the debt payments from the 2022 capital rollover bond. We are continuing our strong investment in MR&R. Minimum wage is increasing from $14 to $15 per the state. And as usual, we are building in the maintenance and of the quality of our programs and parks and facilities that our residents have come to know. For capital, we are funding capital as best as we can through operating, and for 2025 and 2026, operating funds of $1.25 million is going towards capital. In addition to the debt that has already built the project. So we're currently paying off the debt related to the spray ground. So in a sense, debt is just another form of capital. We're just paying it in later years.
Got some high years of debt coming, right? Our debt payments, our debt service coverage.
We will go over.
High.
Yes, the debt, there's debt slides later on in the.
7, 8.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So some reasons for why the operating expense is outpacing the operating revenue is although CPI is decreasing and we see that percentage coming down, the prices of goods and services are not. So those ramped up with inflation and those are staying where they are. We have noticed ourselves that old contracts have expired. And when we're entering into new contracts, we're now getting hit with those increased service costs. And an example of that is our recent land management contract that we just approved at the last meeting. Over that 3-year period for 25, 26, and 27, that was a 29% increase from when we last approved it for years 22, 23, and 24. Staff does their best to try to mitigate the expenses. We use various co-ops, join different co-ops to keep pricing down the best that we can. I know there's a little concern with the Fed decreasing their rates and how that's impacting our investment income, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. As I mentioned, minimum wage is increasing. The holding of the assets causes our maintenance and repairs to increase. We have experienced some supply shortages. Our recent golf pole cars is an example of that. They were ordered, I don't know, in the middle of the summer, beginning of summer, and we just got them in. Direct increases or impacts to our budget, I'll reiterate again, is the $160,000 for staffing requests, the increase of $263,000 of debt, and then the additional basic subsidy of $235,000 for the McCollum Park operations that came online this year.
Trish, I have a quick question regarding to staffing, and if I missed it, I apologize. Do we have in our budget what our head count is currently?
Yes, I have slides on that. I'll go over that.
Is it in this document that you passed out or no?
It is. I
Okay.
have the slides and it's also in the,
This one?
budget document that was attached to
Thank you.
board doc. These are just some brief examples. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I did want to point out within these examples, some of them are tax funded and some of them are non-tax funded. So for example, when we use official finders as our referee services for any of our games, that's specific to that program, right? So we're using official finders for flag football. If their hourly rate to their officials goes up, they're passing that cost to us. That's a direct cost to that program. That program is funding that. That's a non-tax funded item. Whereas something like the natural areas land management contract that I brought up, that's solely supported by the tax dollars. So here's different examples. I did have a typo on your PowerPoint, but it's fixed. The rough mowers for golf is an example of a non-tax funded item. But a lawnmower that the parks maintenance staff uses is tax funded. So just to give you guys an idea of how some of these different purchases and the revenues that correlate with them. We are they're planning or have the desire to give staff merit increases in addition to cost of living. So currently we've always, or historically, we've pretty much done a flat percentage, and that's what the majority of the staff gets. And we consider it cost of living, keeping up with inflation. So what we're proposing in this budget is we have the cost of living built in at 3.5%. And then we're also building in an additional $70,000 of funds that includes the wage increase along with the tax and IMRF implications. So that we can really offset our high performers, or if there's adjustments that need to be made to the salary schedule, we have the flexibility to make those adjustments and not always have to find a way to do it. A couple of fun facts is the age of our district assets. The average age of our parking lots is 17 years old, with 9 of those lots being over 20 years old in 2025. And the age of our playgrounds is the average age of our playgrounds is currently 15 years old, with 16 of the 24 being over 15 years in 2025. Staff is proposing to offset rising costs by the following. It's going to be a combination of obviously the property tax levy, charges for services, and staff continuing to find efficiencies. For the property tax levy, we are allowed to increase it for new growth and CPI. Typically, new growth has been anywhere from 0.5% to 1%. And then we have the CPI that's dictated to us. And the CPI that we use is the year-end 2023 CPI rate. That's where we're getting that 3.4. So we use the 2023 CPI rate that flows into the 2024 tax levy. That tax levy is then collectible in 2025, which is funding this budget. In addition, we are requesting additional $1,000 for special recreation. Why we feel this is needed is because CSPAR maintained a low tax rate for many, many years. And they've had different impacts on their budget, and they now need to raise their levy. So we need to flow that through to us. So our contribution has increased between last year or I should say 2024 and 2025, $125,000. So in order to keep up with the ADA improvement plan that Paul just recently presented, we are seeking that additional $100,000 to cover that improvement plan. Otherwise, we have to come up with other avenues to be able to continue to make those improvements. Charges for services, Michelle's staff does an excellent job on this. Many things go into setting fees for the different programs, such as looking at comparables, what's going on in the economy, profit margins, and ultimately consulting our revenue policy. Overall, we're budgeting around a 4% increase for charges of services. As I mentioned, that's because of demand, that's because of fee increases, that's because of new programs being added to the budget. As mentioned a couple of weeks ago, fitness growth is budgeted at 4% with no fee increase. Golf is budgeted at about 5% or $1 per round increase. And as usual, staff always looks for ways to improve processes, volunteer our time rather than pay part-time staff to work special events. We're always looking for different efficiencies that we can do on our end to help save the district some money. Looking at operating revenues, it is pretty much industry-wide, and what the district consistently strives for is a 60%, 40% split between tax revenue and non-tax revenue, with tax revenue being the 60%. You will see what it makes up the tax revenue, or what we're seeking is obviously the tax levy increase. It's also increasing with the bond and interest. What I want to point out is that we are budgeting for a reduction in the replacement taxes that we get from the state. They are still currently correcting the misallocation of overpaying us the last couple of years. So we do think that we're coming down to our new norm for the replacement taxes, which is severely less than what we were at before. So as of the 2025 budget, the tax revenues are about 59% of the total revenues. For non-tax, this is just a reminder that the golf is budgeted to increase $1 per round, passes the 10% increase, and then the rest is made up of the recreation program growth between demand and fee adjustments. We also are budgeting an increase in sponsorship and advertising this year. Our marketing team has revamped their advertise offerings along with the sponsorship offerings. So we're really excited to offer that out to the community. Looking specifically at taxes, as I mentioned, the replacement tax is budgeted to go down a little bit. We are budgeting for the increase in the bond and interest for the 2022 rollover bond. And then our full levy that's built into this budget is the CPI adjustment of 3.4%, the 0.45% of new construction, and the $100,000 for special rec. All of this is about a 6.2% increase in from 2024 to 2025. So our role in the property tax process is we're the community. We're setting our budget. We're coming up with our property tax levy dollar amount that we want. The county assessor goes out and assesses the fair market value of the properties. Those two items merge together and form the tax rate. That tax rate is then applied to each individual's property, and that is what makes the actual tax revenue generation that we receive. It's important to note that when we look at this, this is a sample tax bill of somebody within the Downers Grove Park District. And what you see on the screen is the Park District is in green. We're at 5.7%. So we make up 5.7% of the property tax bill within the district, of those homes that reside within the district. That equals $5.70 for every $100 in taxes. This is based off of the current information. So this is based off of the 2023 tax levy that we are collecting in 2024. The 10-year average increase for property taxes that we've done here at the district has been 3.8%, and the 15-year average increase is about 3%.
Trish, how does that split out? Is new construction built into that? That 3.8 and 3.0?
I believe it is.
So then it's actually new construction has brought more homes into the community. So then probably about 0.5% less is what taxpayers have done.
Right.
And the county portion of the pie you had,
So that's a culmination. So of like the forest preserve, the county, any county department that you see on your tax bill, that's what's flowing up into that percentage.
Same thing with the schools, it includes.
Yeah, that's all the schools. Mhm. Moving on and seeing how we compare to some of our comparables here in DuPage County. We looked at Carroll Stream, Lombard, St. Charles, Wheaton, and Woodridge, and across the board, you will see in white is Downers Grove. And our tax rate is the lowest out of all of them. So we really pride ourselves in being able to maintain a low tax rate, especially when we're looking at our neighboring communities. On a $400,000 property, that equates to about $434 to the Downers Grove Park District, where you can see some of our communities are over $700 that they're paying to the Park District on their homes. The tax recommendation that is built into this current budget is laid out. So the first line for capital and operating levy, that is ultimately the new construction and 3.4% of CPI. So you'll see that the change to that is $461,716. That also includes the special rec $100,000. Bond and interest levy changes, and that's $253,000. That relates to the rollover bond. And then the abatements are increasing slightly, so we see that change of $11,000. The total change is $703,000. That would be the total dollars that would flow through to the Park District that we would receive as revenue from all of the homes that reside in our boundaries. The Park District rate, the current rate is 0.3409. The proposed rate would be 0.3551 for the change of 0.0142. Please keep in mind, these are all estimated as we don't have, as the county prepares the final numbers once we submit our tax levy. The impact on a $400,000 house, the net impact between 2023 and 2024 would be roughly $28. For an $800,000 home, it would be about $56. And for a $1.2 million home, it would be $84. Again, those are estimated dollars. That would be the impact for the whole year. We are recommending this, one, because the special rec, they're increasing, their need for funding is increasing, so we need to keep up with that. We also need to keep up with the operation of McCollum Park, as well as be able to continue to invest in capital at such a strong dollar amount of the $1.25 million that I mentioned. Should the board opt to not go with this full proposal, there will be impacts to the budget, and those could be impacts that relate to capital, MR&R, or personnel costs that we can talk about at the end when I circle back to the tax levy. Moving on to charges for services. Charges for services makes up 32% of revenue. It is the largest non-tax revenue source that the district has. You will see for 2025, I've mentioned it's going up about 4% or about $230,000. This is coming from golf. We have the dollar per round increase. However, we actually show golf as decreasing overall, one, for a weather adjustment, and two, because of the irrigation project where we decided that we would cut the fees $3 per round when that irrigation project is going on. For fitness, there's $33,000 contributing to this. This is strictly to just growing the number of fitness members that we have. There is no fee increase there. When it comes to recreation programming, this is increasing about $277,000, and this is a culmination of fee adjustments, growth and participation, along with new program offerings. A very interesting slide. What I find it to be very interesting is definitely looking at the charges for services by location. So we have offsite, outdoor and events, Lincoln Center, Rec and Fitness Center, Museum and Lyman Woods are combined, and then the golf course. While the dollar amount in comparison to the others for the museum and Lyman Woods is $500,000, I think it's important to note that the museum and Lyman Woods facilities have grown 3.5 times the amount that they were back in 2020. That's huge. The programs have just grown leaps and bounds out there. And if you look at in the white box and you locate third line, the museum, you can see that we're estimating growth for 2024 to be 10%. And we're continuing that growth to be 11% in 2025. Most of the other ones, with the exception of the Lincoln Center, are actually decreasing from their estimate to their estimated for 2024 to 2025. So it's important to see that Museum and Lyman Woods are anticipated to continue to grow and have new offerings out there. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Pusateri. She's our superintendent of recreation, and she is just going to highlight some of the programs from a participation standpoint, as well as a fee increase standpoint.
Thank you, Trish. So to give a few examples of the larger programs within recreation, I will start with nature programs at Lyman Woods, like Trish just mentioned. The nature programs and camps at Lyman Woods account for approximately 3,400 participants. That is not including school field trips, scout groups, private programs, outreach programs. That is just the programs that you see in the guide that people can register for. The fee increase for those programs is currently budgeted at a 4% fee increase. But in separating out the summer camps of those areas, the general nature programs are budgeted at a 1.75% fee increase. Majority of those programs cost between $10 to $30. When it comes to youth athletics, we always take a close look at the value of the league. So what are they getting for the price of participation, which includes field and court space for practices and games, uniforms, what supplies are needed, scorekeepers, field attendance, and officials, as Trish mentioned earlier. There are approximately 2,900 youth soccer participants and approximately 2,400 youth basketball participants. This is all based on 2024. We are budgeting a 0% fee increase for both of those programs. For youth flag football, we have approximately 1,200 participants, and we are budgeting for a 4% fee increase for that sport, which is equivalent to about $5 per player. This is due to the expense of the jerseys that continues to increase, as well as the officiating services are increasing as well. Moving on to cultural arts. This includes dance, music, theater, and art. This is an area that is budgeted at a 1% fee increase and a 28% participation increase. This is mostly due to the art program. The art program is budgeted with a 1% decrease in fees for 2025, but a participation growth of 99%. This is really a regrowth versus a growth because our main art instructor in 2024, unfortunately, was out on leave. But she has returned, and we are also hiring additional art instructors as well. Next is preschool. Preschool has 180 students during the school year. We are budgeting for a 2.5% fee increase and a 2.75 participation increase. This increase will help cover increasing preschool teacher wages, as well as classroom updates with the replacement of some old toys and furniture like train tables and kitchen play sets. And finally, our adventure camp program. This is our traditional all-day summer day camp with 1,500 participants. We are budgeting a 3.5% fee increase, which is equivalent to about $10. This increase is due to increased field trip admission costs, which also increases our transportation costs with those field trips, and also the camp counselor wage increases. I do just want to point out that we do have our financial assistance program as well, that we are continuing to fund and to help those in need if they would like to participate in our programs. So I will turn it back over to Trish.
Moving on to merchandise and concessions. This makes up 2% of the budget. Although it's a small percentage, it still brings revenue into the district. We are budgeting for about a $9,000 decrease here. And it's made up of two main things. A $20,000 decrease in merchandise sales. One, we experienced record sales at the Pro Shop in 2023. We saw that decline in 2024. We are keeping the 2025 level the same as what we're seeing in 2024 because the excitement of the name change of Belmont Golf Club has worn off. In addition, the basketball jerseys that were once a part of the basketball fee where the participants would buy their jerseys from the district, they are now buying their jerseys specifically through a third-party vendor. So we don't have that money coming in, nor do we have that expense of the jerseys going out. So that's why that is decreasing so sharply.
Trish, that's an actual interesting point, because that's one of the efficiencies we often don't think about, is our staff was taking time doing a lot of that ordering, going through all that process. We weren't really making anything off of it. So this was something we found a way to outsource it to the business that was doing it, and the kids and their parents can handle it. It frees up time for our staff to take on other opportunities.
And we are budgeting an $11,000 increase related to food and beverage sales. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we bought that new electric dryer at the Belmont Golf Club. We are looking to expand different concession items there, utilizing that piece of equipment. We are also planning on hosting a couple of pickleball tournaments next year out at McCullum. So built into this is also revenue coming from alcohol sales, as well as our typical concession sales from Adventure Falls. Rentals and affiliates make up 3% of our revenues. It's important to note here that within this category, it's all rentals. It's our cell tower rentals. It's our property rentals at 943 and 947 Maple. We are seeing a decrease of about $10,000 or 1.6%. And this is really related to the fact that in 2024, one of our cell tower leases was actually reinstated. So because that cell tower was reinstated in 2024, we received a one-time back pay payment of $16,000 from the time it was terminated to the time it came back online. So obviously we won't see that one-time payment again in 2025, but what we will see is the continued monthly lease payments from that cell tower lease. Just a reminder that there was no fee increase for the golf cart rentals out at Belmont Golf Club. And we are factoring in a weather adjustment for those, bringing down that revenue slightly.
First, we're not anticipating any changes in the affiliate relationships that we currently have for 2025, are we?
So I think Bill or Dave could better address that.
Renegotiate those.
Yep, right.
Every year, and we are looking at a slight fee increase to that. We'd also like to start having conversations with them as as their organizations have changed a little bit where they used to donate a lot of time for field maintenance.
Yeah.
They're not doing that. Having a cost share or a cost over a number of years of them, putting money into some of the costs of rehabilitating.
Okay, we're not in fear of losing any of our affiliates.
We are not.
Okay, thank you. So that cost share arrangement then would obviously reduce time and labor for staff. As well as.
Well, probably
utilization.
not. It will help with the paying of it. I think we'd end up having to coordinate more than we have.
Okay.
But just the nature of volunteerism, it has changed, and particularly on the DGYB side of the affiliates. A lot of the people that had donated decades have moved on. There's really backfilling that.
We've also seen it from the MR&R and capital side, whereas a lot of these organizations would help us when we'd add dugouts, when we'd add scoreboards, when we would redo fields. Not seeing that as often. So then those costs are either coming upon us or the schools, if the schools have those sites that we have an intergovernmental agreement with them.
And Eric is in the process of revamping the agreements that we have with both school districts right now. I'm looking at what their costs are, what their needs are, what our costs are. Had a lot of discussions around the golf course and the impact, both on a operation and financially with the golf course, with the teams there, as well as some of the cost of us mowing. From what I'm hearing from Eric, it's been a really good conversation, and I think both sides are realizing what each of us do for each other and what that cost is. So we may see some change there as well.
Would you guys say that we tend to do and offer more to District 58 and District 99 than we want to the Park District?
I would not necessarily say that, Joe. I think it's really based on each of our needs. Like with 58, I think a lot of their need is assistance with handling the lawn mowing and landscaping areas, as ours is a lot of field space and they have plenty of it. I think that you'll see some stuff change from both sides because just over the prior 20-25 years, the needs have become different. What they needed back then, we needed back then isn't the same as now. Good example is we had an agreement with pools with the high school. We don't even utilize those anymore for any of our programming. So I think that, I think you'll see subtle changes, but I don't think the large dynamic of sharing the fields in Downers Grove, which was the main intent for all of them, will change. And that's, I think, where you see I think it was the high schools, we were within 5 to 10% of each other. It was just, they needed this time, we needed this day, and a lot of good that you don't see in every community.
What about maintenance expense? I'm primarily thinking 58 here.
58, there's a lot of maintenance expense to us. However, we're able to do it more efficiently and effectively than if they were to outsource it. That cost would considerably go up if it was outsourced for them. I do know that there's some strong benefit to them for us to do that. And that they're very appreciative of that, and I know they don't want to lose it.
And on the other side of the relationship, we're in every single school in every single gym.
So
And when the referendum just passed and they're building the larger gyms, I didn't even ask. I got a call from the superintendent that, hey, just so you know, you're first on the list. You guys can have access to the net. I want you to expand to that. So I think the relationship's really good. I think it was just time for us to refresh it, take a look at
he
it.
himself participated as a coach and referee in our programs. So when we were meeting, I can tell you, Michelle was thrilled that the schools gave us every time we asked. There was actually 40 more practice times, I believe, on there
Ever got
that they provided to us at no cost to us. So those over 2,000 hours of basketball time really helps to offset that maintenance cost to us.
Given that they would have to leverage a third-party contractor for primarily lawn maintenance at a higher expense, do you feel that we're being accurately compensated for the service we're being reported?
If you look at also what they could technically charge for a lot of the travel organizations and their basketball gyms, I think that's where it becomes more equivalent because they could get I can tell you every gym space in the area, people are getting requests from travel groups to use. We get those, they get those. So that's a huge benefit because we could never run a 1,500
No idea.
student program without them.
In those programs.
I think where
But I
the
wanted to ask-
conversations are really good is more on the high school side. Because those buildings are really run by the buildings themselves, particularly when it comes to scheduling and usage and you know, high school athletic departments, what they are. They don't necessarily want to save it for themselves a lot of times. We have a very large bill for the theater when we do our dance program. And some of the things that Eric's pointing out is, hey, this is what it's costing us at the golf course and lost revenue, et cetera. And you're charging us $4,000 for the theater. That really doesn't make sense in the scheme of our relationship. So I think it's more that kind of thing. 58. If we have any difficulties in that, I'll be honest with you, I can pick up the phone there, have a quick conversation. I'll get a call back in a couple hours and it's usually worked out. And it usually comes down to an individual building or an individual principal that just doesn't know what their schedule is and they don't want anybody to touch it. And we work that out.
All right, thank you both.
Does the village make any contributions to the property that we maintain for them? I know there's a couple of parks that are actually village property.
They do not.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I think that's something we should discuss, as you talked about with the memorandum every 30 years, but there is a cost for us.
Right.
We're bearing this cost.
Well, yeah, I will say on the other side, this is another place we have a really good relationship. We just had a conversation today over some things that just doesn't make sense for us to be pushing back and forth through the public. And so we're working through that. A lot of things that they could be charging us for, they don't, because of our relationship and not wanting to re-tax the same taxpayers all the time. So I think we should look at all that stuff, but I'd like to have the opportunity to really kind of sit down and go, what is the full relationship and what are they giving us? What are we giving them?
Or even if it's vital for them just to sign over the property to us, if we're maintaining it
Yeah.
for them, I mean, I don't see
think
why.
that's a very legitimate
Yeah.
conversation. That has been there forever and a day. We're supposed to pay them $1 or they're supposed to pay us $1. I don't think anybody collects anything from anybody, to be honest with you. I think some of the places were more, we need to use that for traffic, that there's full triangles out there. But I don't think they care, to be honest with you. So, and then we could preserve the open space. So, yeah, we could look at that.
But definitely, I think we should get it on our radar as a board for this upcoming year. I'm on board with that.
We had a memory came up today and it was something that I kind of forgot about, but it's hard to equate the relationship sometimes. But when the village was going through their ordinances for food trucks, which is pretty restrictive, that was going to impact us pretty greatly. We were able to just have that conversation with them and say, hey, we rely on food trucks for a whole bunch of stuff, and the requirements you're putting in is basically designed not to have food trucks in the village. And then there was a lot of cost that food trucks operating in the village were going to have to pay to the village, which would make it hard for us to have them there because of the cost. And we were able to work it out when they passed that ordinance that anything on Park District property, we control it. And it's outside of the village ordinance. So while we don't have a direct cost relationship there, that is something that was super beneficial for us. And we're able to have food trucks without all that cost. It would have really hurt us if we weren't able to do that. So that's the kind of stuff that just happens.
And vice versa. Water.
Stormwater is a perfect example, is
We're
that
able to negotiate that too, that hey, we're holding all your stormwater, right? So we really shouldn't be paying for that because we're the recipients of the stormwater and we work collectively in trying to mitigate the stormwater. So we don't pay that fee either. So
when they took on a large cost for us with the dredging of a couple of our ponds
that's part of the
related to it.
Yeah, but I certainly for this upcoming year would like to revisit that.
Yeah.
See what we can do.
Moving on to sponsorships and advertising, I want to point out for 2024, that we are underperforming in 2024 by almost $15,000. And the reason for that goes all the way back to 2023 due to staff changeover. And the new marketing employee did not come on board until October. So she had to get caught up to speed with the marketing department, the ins and outs of it, before she really could go out and secure advertising and sponsorship offerings. So now in 2025, she's fully onboarded. She's ready to go. The marketing team has revamped their offerings for advertising and sponsorship. So we are at budgeted to increase for 2025. When it comes to interest and miscellaneous revenues, this is 3% of the overall revenue budget. Obviously, we've seen strong investment returns over the last couple of years. We anticipate those to continue with the higher rates and the use of our money managers. As I alluded to earlier, I know there is some concern since the feds did just cut the rate and maybe expected future rate cuts. It's uncertain at this time. But what I will tell you is when we joined forces with Sawyer Felduto back in 2021 as our investment managers, interest rates were low. So we are now seeing some of those investments mature and fall off of our books, and those were at less than 1%. And we're now able to secure investments at 3.5 or 4.8%, and some of them are even more than over 5%. So I do think with the laddered approach and those falling off and the rates where they're at, we will be pretty good looking forward to the future, just because we have those long-term investments secured. And I also want to point out that back in August, we brought forth to the board the authorization to invest an additional $2 million into investments and take it out of our money market account. That was invested in short order. I emailed them the next day after that board meeting, and those investments were made within a couple business days. So that money has been locked in at higher rates and laddered out over a 5-year period. In addition, we really push our staff to use their P cards. We get a great rebate from our P card usage. I think this year's rebate was just over $20,000, which was great. And it was only budgeted to come in at 10. So that's how much we put on the P cards, utilities, health insurance payments, anything that we can put on there that doesn't cost us a processing fee, we encourage staff to use. In addition, we implemented the service fee for cancellation of classes, and that has brought in about $12,000. Moving on to the expenditure side and the breakdown, we typically see this to be about close to 80% for operations, with the remaining 20% coming from capital and debt payments. This pie chart just simply shows the breakdown of the different expense categories that we budget for and the slice of the pie that they make up. And I don't think it's any surprise here that you see salary and wages along with employee benefits totaling 53% of this pie chart. I believe we've always had this over 50% for these expenses. Moving in specifically to these two line items, staff is always an agency's number one asset, right? Without our staff, we're not running our programs, we're not maintaining our parks, our facilities. And I think it's important that we take pride in our staff. And for 2025, I have increases split out between full-time salaries, part-time, and then employee benefits and what makes up those increases. So for full-time salaries, there's an overall increase of $313,000. What is this made up of? Well, it's made up of $180,000 that's budgeted just for the cost of living increases for our full-time staff. There is a new Department of Labor standard that's going in that is forcing potential salary changes effective January 1st. That's an additional $25,000 cost to the district. We are budgeting $48,000 in wages for a new parks maintenance position. And this is due to the increase of the McCollum Park needs and expectations. As an executive team, we talked about staffing needs, and with Adventure Falls coming on board and just the size of McCollum and the high standard and quality that we want our residents to experience out there, it was important for us to shift one of our current full-time maintenance people over there full-time and permanently work at that park. However, in doing that, we wanted to be able to maintain the quality of the rest of our parks. So we are budgeting for a new position for maintenance. This was also one of the things that came up as far as one of the priorities that came up in our master plan was we really wanted to continue to make improvements in our parks and facilities. In addition, we had that retirement of Mike Stelter. And he was doing a lot of things out at Lyman Woods on his own time, on the weekends, as far as maintenance that staff didn't know. Well, now we know that he was doing that. So this employee will help get those types of things under control and maintained over at Lyman Woods. As I mentioned earlier, there's additional money slated for salary schedule adjustments and or additional merit pool increases based on overall staff performance. For part-time and seasonal wages, that's increasing a total of $146,000. 125 of that is simply just the raises that we give our part-time staff. That also factors in the minimum wage increase of $1 and any other staffing adjustments that we may need to make based on a salary compression schedule for our part-time staff. $21,000 is the addition of a new part-time Lyman Woods position. This person would assist with the continued growth and the recreation programming over there, stepping in to help teach classes. They would also coordinate volunteer efforts, not only at Lyman Woods, but also district-wide. For employee benefits, we see $154,000 overall increase. $32,000 of that relates to the health insurance. We budgeted a 5% increase for health insurance. We just got word from the village that it will be 5%. We have $29,000 increase for education and training. Really, we're not adding to the budget. We kept the budget the same as 2024. It just looks like an increase because we didn't use all the money for education and training in 2024. Budgeting for that can be difficult. We don't know exactly the timing of conferences and when they will fall, and who will be able to attend. I'm a perfect example. The NRPA conference was budgeted for me for 2024. It falls next week in between this meeting and the 17th. So I will not be attending NRPA just because the timing doesn't work out along with this budget schedule. And then the remainder of this $154,000 relates to our standard increase in payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, our IMRF. Our IMRF contribution rate is increasing slightly. It's currently at 8.78%, and it's going up to 9.02%. That is dictated to us from IMRF based on their actuarial calculations that they do on our investments and our employees and the number of retirees we have. They provide that to us, and we just have to stick with that. So Craig, I think this is the fun chart that you were looking forward to. We are budgeting for 61 staff members, full-time staff members. Of that, 81% of those staff members belong in Parks and Rec. The other 19 is the department directors, the finance team, marketing, IT, HR. So not very many members there. But what I think is most exciting to see about this, that at the end of 2025, we are anticipating that 64% of our total full-time employee staff will be at the district for 5 or more years. And I just think that speaks volumes to the culture that we have here at the district. People want to remain as employees of the district. We treat our employees well. We've been able to compensate them well, give the salary adjustments where needed. And I think that just speaks volumes to everything, to the mission, vision, and values of the park district.
Currently, are there 61 employees? Are all those positions currently filled?
No. So for example, the superintendent of finance position is not currently filled, nor is that position currently budgeted. So in looking at the needs of the park district, it was more important to say, do we need the superintendent of finance right now? How are we doing? And if that money could be spent elsewhere, then that's what we should do. So whenever a vacancy comes up, we really go through that process of what does that position do? Is it warranted right at that time? Is there another department that maybe really needs the resources? And we look at all of those things as a whole. So it's still like an authorized position, if you will, in the head count. It just does not have a budgeted dollar amount to it.
As we sit here today, what is our head count of full-time positions?
It would be 60.
60. So we're only down to one vacancy, which you do not intend on filling.
Correct, not in 2025
Okay.
at this time.
Are you intending on holding to 60 if we have another vacancy for the next budget year?
That would depend on what that position was and what the department needs are at the time that the vacancy comes up.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
It just is taking a look at our overall needs at that time and where we anticipate being in the future. But finance specifically, we've made a lot of process improvements over the years. We've changed payroll systems twice. We've implemented a new financial software system. So we've made the large changes already in the 7 years that Eric and I worked together. So we feel that at this time, we could spend those dollars somewhere else because those large changes and other process improvements have happened. We have other efficiencies, so we can get our work done in a more timely order. So we just look at that whenever somebody leaves the district.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And pretty much, we even do it on the park side, but pretty much anytime the position opens up, we reevaluate it, we move things around. It happens all the time in the rec side. And if we don't need that position, then we just don't fill it. Just because we had somebody doesn't mean we're gonna spend that same kind of money. But I did want to mention, I think we will, Sandra would be the one to appreciate the retention we had, because we had a time that our retention was very low. So we've made some huge strides.
And I actually just had a conversation with someone today, just, talking about the work that I've done in the park board, just saying that the staff is, exemplary and, so smart and so interested in the community and so excited about the community. And I really honestly cannot say enough about the staff. And as Bill said, just having the perspective of 7 years, it only gets better. So, well done.
Huge goal.
Achieved.
Moving on to professionals and consultants, this makes up 13% of the budget, and this really complements our staff. This is maybe we have contractual programming for specialty classes that our staff isn't equipped to teach, and so those are contractual, so those services are provided elsewhere. This also includes our CSAR contribution amounts. That's the $49,000 increase. That is our contribution directly related to the levy. So I mentioned for 2020, between 2024 and 2025, that's going up about 125,000. So you can see 50,000 is right there in 2025. What I do want to mention is that we do plan on actually increasing this professional and consultants line item by an additional $10,000. That's a late add to this. It came up after this presentation was put together, and that relates to the actual CSPAR inclusion services that we received. So we recently received our summer invoice from CSPAR and the inclusion services, and just for the summer programming, that invoice was $26,000. So we see that CSPAR has a huge impact on us. We were not anticipating it to be that high. They have had to increase their rates and pass that on to us. The budget currently, as it stands, only has $22,000 for inclusion services for 2025. So based on where we're standing in 2024, I feel it's important that we increase that line item an additional $10,000 so that we're actually accurately budgeting for those inclusion services that we're receiving from CSPAR.
One of the specific pressures aside from just wage growth on the inclusion side is because some of the member agencies are in Cook County and some of those agencies are villages, not park districts. That legal counsel has said that throws CSPAR as a whole underneath Cook County's wage and time off requirements that are specific to Cook County, which means even part-time employees get so many hours of vacation time. So even if they're seasonal, they have vacation time. So what the board did was on all of the inclusion costs, we've added a small percentage to put into a fund, be able to pay for those. We're not double paying, because in effect, we got to pay for the replacement. So somebody takes vacation on a part-time basis, we have to pay for a new person to fill that spot. So we're double paying. And we struggled with that. How do you make that fair? How do you not make that fair? We jokingly said we're just throw all the villages out and we'll be good. But that is one of the pressures that we were having, is because we're subject to that. And we don't know how many are going to take that vacation. I can tell you park districts aren't having it, but other villages are having it in Cook County where they're struggling with lifeguards and things like that, because I want to go to Lollapalooza and take vacation time, and that it's legitimate. So there's been a lot of work done with the Cook County Board to try to get park district villages exempt from that, but that has not gone anywhere at this time. So that's part of the pressure on that inclusion cost.
We are seeing an increase to administrative professionals and consultants. $20,000 of this is an increase in legal costs due to our union contract. We are coming up for negotiations in 2025. So whenever there's a negotiation year, we always bump up the legal fees to help cover that. Contractual.
So who's gonna represent us? Is it the same, our same
No.
law firm?
Historically, it's been Ansel Glink. They have a portion of their department that does labor agreements. And they've worked with Marion from our team to work on this agreement.
Okay, so it is our current counsel. They're just.
Yeah, somebody in their firm that specializes on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Contractual services makes up 4%. This is going up about $67,000. The majority of this relates to the pickleball tournaments that we plan to host next year. We feel there's going to be a lot of items that need to be rented, such as bleachers or additional porta potty toilets, things like that. We put the numbers in here as an expense, as we will have to pay for them out of pocket, but we do anticipate the majority of those expenses being reimbursed. So we do have the reimbursement as a revenue so it's a zero impact within this budget. And there is an additional increase here as the recreation staff is planning on adding over 10 new special events in 2025, which is very exciting. Utilities makes up 4%. There's really nothing here that's earth shattering. We're budgeting for an increase in usage across the board for our utilities. We are also budgeting for an increase in the water and sewer rates that we know that are going to happen in 2025. So this is going up roughly 4.9%. Materials and supplies makes up 6%. This is going up about $12,000 or 1.4% for 2025. One of the things that's helping us out in this area, I already mentioned, is a $25,000 decrease in the basketball jerseys. We will not have to purchase those for resale. So that expense has been removed from the books. We are increasing the expansion of special events, as I mentioned, as well as senior programs being offered. So this is an increase of $16,000. This is a straight correlation between our master plan. One of the things we heard was more senior programming. And so staff really took that to heart and are adding additional events and additional senior programming, along with revamping some of the programs that are already in existence. Maintenance, repairs, and replacements makes up 9% of this. 2025 budget has about $1.5 million total for this category. It's holding steady pretty much from 2024 to 2025 with just a $53,000 increase overall. Majority of this increase is stemming from the Adventure Falls mini golf improvements. 2025 is year 2 of those improvements and basically includes the fence being replaced around Minor Mike's. That, however, is being funded by the Belmont Golf Club via a transfer. So we'll show the expense, but then the money will be transferred to offset that cost. Some examples of non-capital replacements that fall into this category that are being budgeted. These are simply samples. There is an all-inclusive list in the actual 2025 budget document that was attached to board pack. But these range from anything from a water bottle filling drinking fountain for $5,000 to the Lincoln Center building lockdown for $15,000 to the potential renaming of the rec center at $25,000. Our fitness cardio leases fall into this category and ADA improvements also fall into this category. So it's really just an all-encompassing list. Moving on to debt. What you see here is the shaded blue part is our debt, and our current debt. 2025 is where the yellow arrow is painting or is pointed to. Debt availability frees up in 2028. That's related to the 2022 capital rollover bond. And should we keep the levy where it's at, we would go out for that bond in 2027, 2028 to keep those additional funds coming in for capital improvements. The line that you see going horizontally across, that's the amount of operational dollars that we fund to pay the debt. So that is ultimately the abatement amount. So when we talk about $710,000 of abatements, that's what this relates to. We're taking money from the general fund that's coming in through those taxes and we're moving it to debt service fund to cover those debt payments. Moving on to capital revenues. The one thing I want to point out here for 2024 is we did have developer donations of $115,000 budgeted. We are not expecting to receive those developer donations. Last year, at the time the budget was being compiled, we were confident that we were going to receive that money based on what the village was telling us. The project that they were spoken of came to a halt and has slowed down and has not really picked up yet in time for us to see any developer donations. To play it safe, we decided to not budget developer donations in 2025, but rather if we do receive them, they will be set aside to go towards the McCollum Park Playground in 2026. And for 2026, you will see that we have the $600,000 notated in there for other capital revenues. That relates to the potential OSLAD grant that we just recently applied for. For the capital projects I mentioned, we are looking just for concurrence that we are satisfied with the overall $3.8 million for the 2025 budget. This, like I said, includes the golf capital along with the non-golf capital. What I have listed here is the projects that we discussed a couple weeks ago for the capital improvement plan. This is not formal. This was just simply a reminder of what we talked about. Staff understands that we are still fully working with the commissioners to determine what projects will ultimately get done in 2025.
I could mention really quickly with the golf improvements on that list, following the board's discussion at the last meeting, staff met Commissioner Dahlstrom out at the golf course today to look at the short game area. And our staff out at the golf course, Jeff and Ken, already had some ideas drawn up on some Google Earth pictures. And out of those and walking the course, we came up with some ideas of what could transpire over there. We believe that we're gonna need some architectural fees and some planning fees for 2025 to be able to kind of flesh those out, get them in place so we can then start to pursue that capital improvement. With that, what we'll likely do is we have these bunker improvements here. What we'll likely do is instead of having those as a line item in the budget, we'll put these plans for this short game area. If our golf dollars come in next year favorably like this year, we could still do those bunker improvements if that's direction of the board. It just allows us to continue on this short term project. And we all know Jeff will already have his hands full with the irrigation in the fall of next year anyways. And what we think it's gonna be, at this point, it's a very nice product. It's a very large product, a lot of ground moving. So the hope would be, the goal would be to get it done in 26, but it would take those plans to decide, can it get done in 26? Does it need to hold on until 27? Because we only want to disturb that area once for the customer experience. If we disturb it too many times, that would be a real hard sell when you have so many people out on that course.
But we do think we can make something work out there.
Moving on to our fund balance. Our fund balance is important. We have a separate fund balance policy, and that states that our funds should be anywhere within a 4 to 6 month range to cover operating expenses. Capital projects fund does not apply for a fund balance. And then while we show a fund balance for golf is we pull it out of the overall government wide down at the bottom, and we look at golf separately. Because it is its own standalone fund and it's treated more like a business aspect than the other funds that we have. So the column all the way to the right, labeled months, if you see in yellow where it's 6.6 months of a fund balance, that is actually at the end of 2026. So the budget, so we have the 2024 projections in here, the 2025 budget. The 2026 column is factored in here. So I just wanted to point out that at the end of 2026 overall, we are looking at a 6.6 month fund balance, which is very strong. Some funds may be a little below, some might be a little higher, but overall, we're in a good solid state there. The assigned column of that $45,000, that actually relates to developer donations that we received in 2023 that we actually assigned specifically within the capital projects fund to go towards the McCollum Playground. So when I say if we receive any more developer donations in 2025, they would also get assigned, specifically allocated to go towards that McCollum Park project.
Really quickly, Trish, this fund balance policy was created about 8-9 years ago, probably. Bill and I were part of the ones that worked on it, and then I've talked at length with Trish about it. And when you develop these policies, you give it a month range, so 4 to 6 months. In good times, you want it at that 6 months or a little bit above. That's why you're seeing it a lot slightly above the 6 months. Just Trish and I, over 20 years in government, have seen the recession of 2008 to 2012. We saw the pandemic. The reason you're topping it out during the good times is so that you can draw it down and not have to react as quickly if necessary during those bad times. It gave us time. I know Bill and I were on the phone a lot during the pandemic. It gave us time to think this out, strategize. How are we gonna handle it? We know we're not gonna run out of cash because it's there. But that's been very important to us. And that's been noted, especially when we had our bond ratings and we got our AAA, that would have been able to accomplish all this capital while maintaining that strong fund balance.
In order to take into account, what we have invested, right, or liquid assets.
No, that's part of the fund.
It
That's
is-
all part of the fund
That is
balance.
part of, that is.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear exactly what you said.
Oh,
That's all part of the fund
it's
balance.
part of the fund.
Assets minus,
So that makes up investments, cash.
Okay. Okay.
Went into COVID, Eric had spreadsheets, we could draw, not draw. How are we gonna survive?
Trish was tracking daily cash.
I still do. That's an outcome of that. Moving on to what is a budget versus an appropriation? The budget is the district's planned or expected expenses for the upcoming fiscal year. So that's what we've been talking about this whole time. What are our planned revenues coming in? What are our planned expenses going out? What the appropriation is that's our actual legal limit on what we can spend during the upcoming fiscal year. So when we file our budget ordinance, the appropriation is typically set to be 20% higher than what our budgeted amount is. That gives us the flexibility, should we need to spend additional funds, that we have that legal authority to do that. For land purchases or capital purposes, for non-golf items in the budget is $1.97 million. The appropriation that we plan to set for capital is going to be exactly $1 million higher at 2.9. Why do we do that? That helps us build in a land contingency in the event a property comes up. We have that authority to spend that money. We don't have to go through a budget amendment process. It just makes things a little bit simpler on that end.
That's pretty standard, that percentage.
So circling back to the master plan that Paul alluded, I just wanted to pull out some things that are in the budget that maybe have been talked about or not talked about, and just show you or demonstrate how they actually tie back to the recent strategic or the recent master plan that we just adopted. So when we talk about the additional staffing needs for the full-time maintenance employee and the part-time Lyman Woods employee, that addresses right off the bat 3 of our strategies that came out in that master plan. The Lyman Woods employee, the part-time, is going to enhance our volunteer program across the board, as mentioned, throughout, not only at Lyman Woods itself, but also throughout the district. And it's going to help us expand our indoor and outdoor nature programming that we already know is expected to continue to grow. The additional full-time maintenance person touches strategy 2.1 and allows us to continue to update and increase access to our parks, paths, and other outdoor amenities, making sure that our standards are being met and it's a strong quality of parks that we're offering to our residents. Built in, but maybe not specifically talked about since the dollar amount is a little bit smaller, is AI and DEI. So we have formed committees for each one of these areas to support innovation and support throughout the district. We continue to research and invest in different AI technologies, and what can we do to help our staff, or what can we do to help our residents? I know one of the things that has been talked about is simply putting up one of the chat bots on our website, so residents can ask a question there and get the immediate answer rather than having to pick up the phone and call. Things like that, we're looking at exploring, just as nice touches for staff to use as well as residents. We're also looking at tying in different cultural events with some of our programs. So that would be related to DEI initiatives that we currently have, but as well that came up in the master plan, is offering different cultural type events for the district. Another large thing that came up was regarding special events and senior programming. We all know it's important to be able to provide either free programming or low-cost programming for our residents, and especially the seniors. And I want to point out that our special events are broken out into two categories. We have our marketing events, which is your parties in the park, dog days, Unplug Illinois, for example. Those events don't bring in any revenue. Dawn and her team are planning to run about 8 events next year. And those are budgeted to impact us from an expense standpoint at $9,300. On the flip side, we have our recreation events, such as the concert series, fishing derby, countdown to noon, candy cane lane, just to name a few. There are 34 total events planned for 2025. However, we are counting the concert series as one. We all know that's a series of 10 or 11 weeks, but rather than saying 44, we counted it as a one. So some of those events are free and some of them have a cost. So they can range from $0, maybe up to $30, $35, depending on the event. When we look at it in totality, our special events of running 34 brings in $7,000 worth of revenue. So not much revenue for all the output that goes out, but it's important to our residents that they can enjoy this type of low-cost programming. Our rec staff is looking to bring on 13 new events out of those 34. 13 are new. And that expense impact will be just under $1,000 to run those. So some of those do have revenues associated with them, but again, it's at low dollar amounts so that our residents can enjoy and participate in it.
Trish, if I could add, with all of these are direct costs, not the indirect ones. All of our full-time staff hours, I can tell you just watching Dawn and her staff and Michelle and her staff, there are weeks of time that are spent planning a lot of these events, so that time is not built in. That goes back to our analysis that we do every year where we start analyzing the indirect expenses. And many of our programs do not run or even break even. They're subsidized by tax dollars, other programs, other items.
To tie into what Eric said, a lot of our special events do require volunteers. So that's where a lot of our full-time staff step up to volunteer. So we're not having those additional expenses of having to pay part-time staff to work those. So most of our staff volunteer anywhere from 3 to 5 or even more special events per year. For senior programming, that was huge in the master plan. It came out, we needed to have more program offerings. We wanted to keep that cost low. There are 56 total offerings budgeted for 2025. Of those 56, 9 are brand new. However, some of our current programs are also being revamped to hopefully gain a little bit more traction and participation. The senior programming will be operating at a loss of $18,000. So the minimal fees for, I think when I was talking with Michelle, like a lot of our senior programming might only be like a $5 expense, right? Because again, we're cognizant of their disposable income and to keep the cost down so that they can come and have the social aspect and participate.
Trish, is there any discussion? I mean, instead of duplicating some of these programs, is there any talk about working with the township at all?
Yeah, we actually are currently doing that.
Okay.
A lot of our senior socials are in partnership with the township and take place at the township. So we kind of all split the expense of that, but they host it. They have a much bigger space than we do as well, so they can take more. And they usually provide the meal and then we provide like decorations and some staff and things like that.
So of that $18,011, the majority of that is spent with other partner.
Some of it is. So the new things we're offering are just for like at our building, mainly Lincoln Center. The township things are already built into that 56. It's just the 9 new are just ours,
Just specific to the district.
to the park district.
Understood, thank you.
And what you
They're not-
find is,
They're not programs that someone else is, we're not duplicating what someone else is.
Right.
Understood.
Right.
and what you find is regardless if it's free or $5 small cost, most seniors are looking for a meal, looking for refreshment snacks. So you're seeing a lot of the new cost also have to do with either the materials that we're using for whatever program it is, or for the food and drink that we're providing.
Understood, thank you.
And as I mentioned before, Adventure Falls is getting subsidized about $235,000 from tax revenues for the 2025 budget, because again, that was a priority of the board and the district. We wanted to be able to provide that low cost experience out at Adventure Falls and Minor Mike's for all of our park district residents to enjoy. As promised, here is some additional tax levy information. So the top box has different changes to the tax levy, if you will, different suggestions of what could take place. The row that's highlighted in yellow at the bottom of that box is what is currently built into the budget as presented tonight. So you can see that if we choose to keep the levy frozen, what impact does that have? Well, keeping the levy frozen simply just brings in the additional revenue for the bond and interest payments. And what is that impact on those homes? Well, that's anywhere from about $8 to $24 based on the value of the home. So that's what that chart, I'm not going to go through every example there, but I just wanted to point out those are different scenarios. The total levy increase column would be the total dollars that flow into the park district as revenue. If we look specifically at the option highlighted in yellow that has been presented and built into the budget as it's been presented, the breakdown in the bottom box shows you what portion of that increase is funding the 2022 debt issuance, what portion is funding new construction and the 3.4 CPI increase, and what portion is funding that additional $100,000 increase to CSPAR. So for example, for the $400,000 home, $10 out of the $28 is going towards that 2022 debt issuance. $14 is going to cover the new growth and the inflation portion. And $4 would go towards that increase in the CSPAR levy, or in the additional money for CSPAR. Should the board elect to maybe not go for that additional $100,000 for special recreation, there are different ways that we could maybe cover this. One would be to just remove the ADA budget that was presented by Paul, which I'm not sure is a great option, but nonetheless, it's an option. The other way to fund that would be to take additional revenues from operating and move it over to special rec to fund those ADA improvements. In addition, if the board elects to maybe not take the full CPI of 3.4 or not elect to capture the new growth that was presented, there will be potential impacts to the expenses. These are simply examples that were pulled out of the budget just to show you what the impacts would be. The full-time parks maintenance employee is about $66,000 across the board with wages, taxes, IMRF, and insurance. The Lyman Woods employee is just under $25,000. The additional merit funds that were discussed, that would include potential salary adjustments if needed, or the additional funds to award our high performers is about $70,000. And then there could be cuts to MR&R, which would be determined by directors, or other operating expenses that would be eliminated. So I just wanted to point that out, that if the board gives the directive to not take the full tax levy, it's okay. We'll just have to regroup and make adjustments to what was presented tonight. So that brings us to our final slide and for open discussion forum. As I mentioned, we are looking for concurrence from the board on the overall direction of the budget. We are looking for concurrence on how to proceed with the tax levy. This would be important as we would bring the board ordinance or the budget ordinance and the tax levy resolution to the October 17th board meetings to get approved to put those items on for public viewing. So we're looking to get that concurrence tonight if possible. And then I just wanted to open up the floor to see if there was any additional follow-up or updates. I know on capital. I know last time we met, a couple of you were talking about potentially going out to look at the other surface at some parks for the tennis courts. So just seeing if anybody had made it out there. Again, the themes are the themes. I think we demonstrated that demand is going to remain strong for us. The recommended tax and non-tax revenues growth, the growth in expenses for 2025, along with just having the limited resources as we continue to move forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or however you guys would like to move forward.
Questions?
I don't either. I don't have questions. I appreciate this was crystal clear. So thank you.
I didn't have any questions. They've already asked my questions.
Had the opportunity already. So.
Yeah. Thank you for tying it back to the master plan, by the way.
The only question I had was concerning the splash pad fees. Are we still going to, what is the intention on?
The actual splash pad fees.
Correct.
Dave can probably better speak to this, but I do not believe that there was any changes to the fees for the 2025 budget.
That's correct. We're projecting to keep it exactly the same as this year. Well, I should say one change that we are proposing, which should be a reduction, is the private after hours rentals.
Okay.
This year was 500. We intentionally didn't focus on that area. We wanted to get the operation up and running. We had a few inquiries, but none booked. But talking it through with staff, we're actually proposing to reduce that from $100. Other than that, our fees are staying the same.
The other adjustment we're making, which isn't fee driven, but it's operational driven, is closing the splash pad about an hour earlier because we really saw attendance drop off. And that allows us then to do the private rentals an hour earlier, which we were hearing and people were like, yeah, that's a little late for the kids to go to bed and that kind of thing. So we're hoping that has some positive impact.
Dave will be bringing out some staff at the next meeting, October 17th, to provide the recap of this year.
As far as the budget goes, that's some of the pushback I'm hearing from the community members is the fees for the splash pad. There's been a couple of instances this past summer where some of the residents were not too happy with the fee structure. And I can see their point. I mean, it was a bone of contention at some events, and that's one of the areas of concern I have moving forward, whether or not, we should even keep charging or reduce it by some. I don't know how the other commissioners feel, I mean, obviously, but to see whether or not there's some room in even reducing some of the fees for the splash pad. Again, we'll have to see the final numbers and see what it takes. We don't have that information.
But I'm certainly open to evaluating that. I want to see the results, for the year and make an informed decision. Absolutely.
That's also a small enough impact that it's not gonna
Well, it looks like we
directly hit the
yeah.
budget with the fees.
I wouldn't make the recommendation to reduce the non-resident rate, and I know we get a lot of concern from the non-resident that the non-resident's high. But I do think that's going to continue to be more and more popular, and that was specifically higher so that our residents had access and weren't being pushed out and overrun by non-residents.
No, I think in district residents, we should look at, or if the commissioners would like to be open for discussion. And that was my excellent job, Trish, on this budget. Very thorough, very professional.
And I would say like I had a discussion, I had a block party this weekend and just threw out there, just, oh, has everybody used splash pad? What's everybody thinking? And I did not have the same pushback on fees. I had people, who love that this is there now. And so, I don't know, because I'm a commissioner, they were more favorable, but. Right, but I didn't experience the same pushback. I had people who loved the space and loved that we have it now and loved that it was, tied there with Minor Mike and we're making hay of it. So, I had different conversations.
Well, let's put together the presentation. We'll put the numbers and then the board can have that discussion. And we can adjust that within the budget. We can make some.
Dave can put all the fees right on them.
Yeah, they're in there, so.
And Trish, to answer your question about visiting the facilities with the
Yes.
sport court, I was out of town last week. I didn't have a chance to do it. I might have it on the docket for next week.
Okay.
Maybe just to get us started here on some of my general thoughts that I have, right? I think about, just expenses and where they're at, right? Our debts are, this was all planned for as we were, as a board, our prior board knew that we were going to be incurring expenses in 26, 27, and 28. The benefit is that we lowered our debt service charges and coverage, during the pandemic years, which immensely benefited the Park District. So our debt service is approaching peak levels in the coming years. I think personnel labor wages are absolutely increasing. We've got CSPAR and ADA improvement demands. MR&R is absolutely increasing. Thinking about the revenue side, what I keep coming back to is we have to reinvest in our success, right? I think you covered the growth trajectory of every single programming that we offer at the district, and it's hockey stick trajectory growth, which is fantastic. I personally believe we're not going to realize that every year. And in order to maintain our level of programming and drive charges for services, right, revenue to the district, we have to reinvest. Not to mention interest income is going to go down. Yes, we just locked in $2 million of Sawyer Feldudo, but if I think about 26 and 27 in a rate reduction environment, we're going to see a reduced interest income. So all of that said, I'm looking at this tax levy situation as both an offensive and a defensive strategy. Like it's a scenario of inputs and outputs, right? We have to take the inputs that are afforded to us to ensure the outputs for the residents and the future innovation of the district. We have the lowest tax base in DuPage County, one of the lowest tax bases in DuPage County. I think that's absolutely still a data point that's working in our favor. So, all of that said, we've got a winning team. We've got a great culture. We have to maintain a compensation level for our employees, both part-time as well as full-time. And if we do that, it drives resident happiness. as well as maintaining a high level of charge for services, which offsets our reliance on the taxpayer. So I'm supportive of, taking full CPI. And I'm open to utilization of the special recreation.
No, I'm in support of the special recreation as well. That's a no-brainer. And for some of the reasons that the commissioner just echoed, I agree. I like being the lowest tax base. That's a good thing. We want that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be reiterated. I think that the commissioner made some eloquent points and I agree. I do have some reservations about adding the part-time Lyman Woods employee. But I don't, it's not a deal breaker for me per se, but it's, I think, worth a little more discussion. But yeah, I think the direction that you're heading in the full CPI is well warranted.
And I left out of my comments. I know we have yet to, firmly decision, the capital projects for 2025. I'm absolutely comfortable with the current list. I think we can adjudicate them as we approach, those projects.
The board will still have multiple chances with that too.
Absolutely.
In the coming weeks, we can have more conversation about it, and then we also bring it for approval before we go out for bid, and then after we go out for bid.
Trish, Michelle, and your point very much, the part-time Lyman Woods, what's the anticipated revenue that position would eventually generate?
Well, it comes with all those growths of programs. I actually, while we were sitting here, we have the winter spring guide draft going on, and we have.
Someone else was looking at that too.
I was counting up the new programs we have, and we have 26 new nature programs in winter spring alone coming up. That's just January through May. That doesn't
Be possible to put that,
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to see what the offset is from a program standpoint, what we're anticipating. Unlike a park position, we expect those positions to generate more revenue through more programming. So
I will say some of that position is also volunteer coordination as well. So it's program-based as well as doing district-wide volunteer coordination. As we add special events and as we add more programs, like Trish mentioned, we need more help. We need more volunteers. So this person would work with the schools, would work with local colleges, would work with organizations to bring in volunteers to us as well.
I can tell you we've left volunteers on the table because we haven't had the ability or resources to do it all in one person. It's kind of here, there, and everywhere. I know Kevin's experienced it greatly when we get these corporate groups that come out and say, hey, we want to start mulching some of your parks for you. Well, then we're scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, how can we get them be able to work with us?
Didn't you forecast 4% growth?
For
Lyman
Lyman Woods, yes.
So that's the FTE part of it, yeah.
But we'll pull some of that, because I think that's a good question. We'll pull that some of that together, and we can also do the job description so you can see.
Okay, so another question or discussion? Next,
We're putting it on display at the.
Well, we'll bring the budget ordinance and the tax levy resolution forward at the October 17th meeting. That's where the tentative ordinance would be approved so that we could put the budget along with the tax levy out for public viewing. So that would be out, it has to be out, I think, with it.
Let me do this from memory. The budget ordinance has to be out for 30 days before approval. The tax levy is 20 days. We have to have notices in the paper for both. I believe the tax levy one it's like 7 to 14 days before the hearing. We would recommend a hearing because we're at like 4.9 some %. It's not required till 5, but whenever we butted up against that, we've wanted to be.
Also had a longstanding history, regardless of what it was, to do that hearing.
And the tax hearing then would be in November because it cannot be on the same day as the budget hearing, which would be December 12th. And that would provide everything to be filed by the correct time frame in December. I believe it's the fourth Tuesday.
And we need that quorum on December 12th.
Actually, on all of them, we need a quorum. We would need a quorum on
We
October,
needed October.
November first. This would be the tax levy hearing, and then December 12th. Which would
We
be,
need 3 people in person.
Special reminder for those.
I think we'll email.
email, I'll be calling.
Have to be here.
I think you already have a calendar. I'll put it in big letters.
Yeah. Job, how are you feeling?
Fine.
Anything else then?
No, I think that was great.
Next time would be any recommendations of other visitors, second opportunity. Yeah, one.
There's no other visitors online.
That was a test to see if you were.
Can I just ask a quick question? Paul, so I saw Lloyd Park, is obviously under construction. Were no delays there, right?
Right, I think, I don't remember offhand what the completion date was. I want to say it's like mid.
Mid-October, right?
It might be actually early November because I think the playground equipment was going to be installed mid-October and then we got to bring the company in to do the turf.
Yeah.
Surfacing, and I think
Yeah.
they might be beginning of
They're doing
November.
the foundation.
They're putting in the equipment.
Yeah.
That goes in first and then they put the surfacing around it.
Okay.
Is there any weather considerations with the surface?
Not too much because it's, so the contractor is putting in the play equipment, will put the stone base, the gravel. And then the turf company just comes in and lays it's carpet, that they put in over the top of the gravel,
Is
so
that what's laying out there right now is the equipment that's all packaged up?
it's the equipment,
Okay.
the play equipment.
Wooden crates.
Yeah.
Yep, was delivered on Monday,
Okay,
and they started installing it at Northside already.
I was driving
So
by
they're-
35 and I thought that was like, foundational. Just foundational work underneath the playground. That's what it looked like to me.
The mountains that were pictured in the background, you're installing those too.
Dawn's cutting out cardboard.
Would be an upgrade.
Right,
Quick question also on the drawing board, service question again for Paul. The pickleball courts and tennis court service we're talking about, is it the same for basketball?
it is the same, they were gonna use the same surface, the company. That we've been talking to
And
has
it's
the
all
same.
the same,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yes, it's the same surface.
Has the basketball hoops.
Right.
That are up in Oak Grove. And they have, I think, pickleball, whereas neighborhoods has pickleball and tennis. And
Right.
it's all the same
But-
material.
You don't have pickleball nets out. At Ranchview, so
So you went to Ranchview?
I went to Ranch.
Okay, I was gonna go to the Brook Hilton.
I think what Dave and I did, we just tried out the pickleball and the tennis both on that same court.
I will say, I played pickleball at Dorhofer yesterday. My wife yelled at me because I wasn't paying attention to our game. I was watching everybody else's ball. But it wasn't, those cracks are out there, but it really wasn't affecting play. And when I was watching the tennis ball, it wasn't affecting either. So I think we have options of time.
Okay.
It's not gonna be forever, but I was pleasantly surprised. If anything, I think the lighting could use an upgrade of odd shadows.
We have a need for executive session. Can we make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Moved in second.
Mr. Lot,
Aye.
Mr. Bender,
Aye.
Mr. Dahlstrom,
Aye.
Mr. Katsula,
Aye.
Ms. McDonald.
Aye.
Good night.
Now that we're going into.